Amina moved through the music school like a small shadow, quiet and unnoticed. She arrived early every morning before the first student stepped through the doors, carrying her simple cleaning bag. Her shoes were old, her clothes were plain, and her head was always slightly lowered. As if she was afraid of taking up space, she cleaned the floors, wiped the piano keys, dusted the benches, and emptied the trash cans, and not once did anyone stop to say hello or even look at her properly. To them, she was just the cleaner, someone who blended into the background like part of the furniture. The school hallways were always noisy, full of students rushing with backpacks, music books, and loud laughter. They would bump into her without saying sorry, push past her when she carried heavy bins, and gossip loudly as if she wasn't even there. Even the teachers barely noticed her. They would walk past her discussing their lesson plans, their brilliant students, and their upcoming performances. But never once did they ask her name or smile at her. It was strange how a building filled with music and art could still fail to see the quiet human being right in front of them. Amina never complained. She kept her head down and did her work with calm, steady hands. Every morning, she cleaned the large grand piano in the main hall, the most expensive instrument in the school. Her fingers moved gently over the keys, almost lovingly. As she wiped the dust from them, sometimes she paused before she finished, resting her fingertips lightly on the smooth white surface. She would close her eyes for a second, remembering something only she knew, a feeling deep inside her that she tried hard to bury. Then she would pull her hand away quickly, as if afraid someone might see the truth she was hiding. One morning, after finishing her chores earlier than usual, Amina found herself alone in the main hall. The sunlight entered through the tall windows, creating a soft glow around the grand piano. For a moment, she felt drawn to it, like a magnet pulling her closer. She looked around the empty room, making sure no one was watching. Then she slowly sat down on the bench, her heart beating fast. It had been so long since she allowed herself to sit at a piano. So long since she let her fingers rest on the keys without fear. She lifted her hands, still shaking a little, and pressed a few soft notes. The sound echoed beautifully through the empty hall. Clear and warm, Amina felt something deep inside her open, like a locked door creaking after many years. She played only for a few seconds, just enough to remember how it felt. But the moment was enough to make her eyes sting with emotion. She quickly stopped when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Her heart jumped, and she stood up at once, wiping the bench and backing away from the instrument as if she had done something wrong. The footsteps passed, and no one noticed her once again. Every day was like this for Amina, routine, quiet, invisible. She had been working in the school for 3 years, and still, no one really knew anything about her. They did not know she walked 2 buses and 1 long street to reach the school every morning. They did not know she lived alone in a small apartment with peeling paint and a broken heater. They did not know she once performed on real stages, under bright lights, with crowds that clapped for her until their hands hurt. They did not know she once had a mother who believed she would become someone great, someone unforgettable, someone whose music would touch hearts around the world. But life could change paths without warning. And Amina's life changed the day her mother passed away in a sudden accident. The shock broke something inside her. Music became too painful, too full of memories. She walked away from her dreams, telling herself they belonged to a different time, a different version of her. Now she cleaned pianos instead of playing them, cleaned floors instead of standing on stages, cleaned hallways instead of walking toward a future she once saw clearly. She built a small, quiet world around herself, where she expected nothing and hoped for nothing. But even though she tried to hide from music, music did not want to hide from her. Every note she wiped off a piano key felt like a whisper calling her back. Every warm sound that escaped from a rehearsal room felt like a reminder of the life she left behind. Sometimes she would pause outside the practice rooms and listen to the young students play. Some were good, some struggled, but all of them made her smile softly. One part of her heart was still asleep, but another part was slowly waking up. For years she had convinced herself she did not deserve to touch a piano again. But deep inside, the truth never died. Amina did not know that soon, her quiet life would be shaken. The same people who ignored her would soon stare at her in shock. The same teachers who walked past her without a word would soon whisper her name with respect. And the same students who laughed around her would soon watch her with wide eyes, wondering how they never saw her for who she truly was. Her life was about to change, not because she asked for it, but because fate had been waiting patiently for the right moment to reveal her forgotten light. That moment was much closer than she realized, and the world that never noticed her was about to see her clearly for the first time. The music school was busier than usual that morning. Teachers rushed around carrying sheets of music, whispering about an important visitor coming later that week. A famous music examiner was scheduled to observe the school, and everyone felt pressure to impress him. The students were nervous, and the teachers were even more nervous. They wanted the school to shine, but there was one big problem that none of them could solve. The examiner had requested a very difficult classical piano piece, something only highly trained musicians could play well. The teachers had tried multiple students, but every attempt failed. Some students missed half the notes, others played too slowly, and a few even froze mid-performance. The teachers grew frustrated, their stress turned into irritation, and they started blaming each other for not training the students better. No one had a solution, and time was running out. While they argued in the hallway, Amina walked quietly past them carrying a mop bucket. As always, none of them noticed her. They continued their loud discussion as she worked in the background. One annoyed teacher sighed and said, "At this rate, even the cleaner could do a better job," the others laughed. Not realizing Amina was only a few steps away, she heard the words clearly. But she pretended not to. Her face stayed calm. But her heart felt a small sting. She was used to being invisible. But it still hurt when people spoke about her as if she were nothing. The principal arrived, looking stressed and impatient. He listened to the teachers complain about the students' performances. Then he looked around the hall and spotted Amina wiping the piano bench. Something in his tired mind snapped. Maybe it was frustration, maybe embarrassment, or maybe he just wanted to prove a point. Without thinking, he raised his voice and said, "You, Amina, come here." Everyone turned their heads toward her. She froze in place, unsure what she had done wrong. "Sit at the piano," the principal ordered. The teachers stared in confusion. The students began whispering and giggling among themselves. One girl whispered loudly, "She doesn't even know what a piano piece is." Another boy laughed and said, "This is going to be funny." The laughter grew, and all eyes fell on Amina. She felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She wanted to run, but her legs refused to move slowly. She walked toward the piano. Her steps were small and shaky. She sat down carefully on the bench. Keeping her hands on her lap, the room fell silent. But the silence was not kind. It was sharp, filled with judgment and expectation of failure. Amina looked at the teachers, then at the students, and finally at the keys. Her heart pounded so loudly she felt the whole room could hear it. The principal crossed his arms. "Play the piece we gave the students," he said. Amina's breath caught in her chest. It was a piece she knew well, one she had once performed flawlessly many years ago, but she had not played in so long, and the pressure of so many eyes made her hands tremble. She lifted her fingers slowly, but fear held them stiff in the air. The teachers watched closely, some with smirks, some with pity. They expected mistakes. They expected her to freeze. They expected her to embarrass herself. Amina knew this, and the weight of their expectations pressed heavily on her shoulders. She wanted to sink into the floor, disappear, become invisible like always. But she also knew she had been given no choice. They wanted to test her, mock her, use her as entertainment. And she could see it clearly in their eyes. She placed her hands on the keys. Her fingertips touched the cold surface. A memory flashed through her mind, her mother's smile, the warm lights of a stage. The feeling of music flowing through her. For a moment, she forgot the whispers and the laughter in the room. The world faded, and she saw only the piano. Something she loved deeply, but had pushed away for years. But then the whispers returned, one student snickering. "She's scared," another whispering. "She's going to ruin it." The doubt surrounded her again like a fog. Amina swallowed hard. Her hands trembled again. She pressed one key lightly, allowing the softest note to fill the room. It wasn't enough to silence anyone, but it was enough to remind her of something inside herself. Something she thought she had buried forever. No one knew that the woman they all underestimated, the woman they mocked, the woman they ignored every single day, carried a talent far beyond what any of them imagined. And in a moment, that talent was about to rise again, whether she wanted it to or not. The air grew still, the keys waited, and Amina took a slow breath. She had no idea that this forced moment, born from mockery, would change her life forever. Amina's fingers hovered above the piano keys. But her mind was no longer in the noisy school hall. It drifted far away, back to the life she once had. A life none of the students or teachers could imagine in that moment. Memories she had tried to bury came rising to the surface like waves. Strong and unstoppable, her heart ached. Not from fear, but from remembering who she used to be. And how different she was from the quiet cleaner they all saw now. She remembered the first time she touched a piano as a little girl. She was small, shy, and curious. Her mother had taken her to a community music center. And little Amina had walked straight toward the piano, as if the instrument was calling her. The teacher allowed her to sit and press a few keys. And the moment she played her first notes, her mother knew something special was in her. From that day on, music became the center of her world. She practiced for hours every day, sometimes forgetting to eat because the piano felt more important than food. Her mother supported her with everything she had, even when they struggled financially. She worked extra jobs, skipped her own meals, and saved every coin to pay for Amina's lessons. She believed her daughter had a gift, a rare gift, and she wanted the world to see it. Amina grew stronger and more confident. Soon she entered competitions, and she won them one by one. Judges praised her, audiences applauded her, and newspapers wrote about the young girl with magic in her fingers. Her mother would stand in the crowd with tears of pride, whispering, "My daughter will change the world with her music." But life rarely follows the path we expect. One rainy night, when Amina was 16, everything changed. She and her mother were returning from a performance when a sudden accident took her mother's life. The shock shattered her world. She lost not just her parent, but her anchor, her inspiration, her biggest supporter. Without her mother, the piano no longer felt warm or welcoming. Every key reminded her of her loss. Every melody felt like a farewell. The stage lights that once excited her now felt blinding and cold. She tried to keep playing, but the grief was too heavy. Slowly, she drifted away from music. She refused invitations, skipped practices, and eventually stopped attending lessons. People around her tried to encourage her, but nothing worked. She shut the piano lid and walked away, telling herself that chapter of her life was over. She took small jobs to survive, jobs that didn't require passion or talent. She chose work where she could stay hidden, where no one would ask about her past. Eventually, she became a cleaner in the music school, the very kind of place she once dreamed of owning. She told herself she didn't belong on the stage anymore, that her gift died with her mother. Now, sitting in front of the piano again after so many years, facing the judgment of students and teachers. She felt those old memories striking her heart. She remembered the applause, the bright lights, the pride on her mother's face, and the beautiful promise she once carried. It all felt like another lifetime, a dream lost behind pain and silence. Her fingers trembled not because she didn't know how to play, but because she remembered how much she loved it, and how much it hurt to lose that love. The students' whispers pulled her back to the present, reminding her that she was no longer the admired prodigy, but a cleaner being forced to perform in front of people who expected her to fail. She closed her eyes for a moment. Letting the memories settle, she tried to push them away, but they refused to disappear. They were part of her, the real her, the version she had hidden under years of loneliness and fear. Amina took a slow breath, trying to steady her shaking hands. She knew she could walk away, refuse to play, or make an excuse. But deep inside, something whispered to her. Something small but powerful. It was her mother's voice, gentle and warm, saying, "Play, my daughter, you were born for this." A tear almost escaped her eye, but she swallowed it back. The room waited, the piano waited, and her past waited to rise again. She looked at the keys, her reflection faintly visible on their polished surface. For years she convinced herself that she had forgotten how to play. But the truth was different. Her gift was not gone. It was sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake. And now, pushed by fate and pressure, that moment had finally arrived. She placed her fingers on the keys, feeling the familiar warmth, feeling the connection she once thought she lost. The students leaned forward, the teachers held their breath, and Amina felt a spark she had not felt in years. She took another breath, letting her past guide her. She prepared to play the first real note, not knowing that what she was about to reveal would shock everyone in the room and change the path of her life forever. The room was silent as Amina rested her fingers on the piano keys. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, waiting not with hope but with doubt. The students leaned forward with smirks, expecting her to mess up. The teachers watched with raised eyebrows, ready to shake their heads the moment she played a wrong note. Even the principal stood stiffly, arms crossed, looking as if he already regretted calling her forward. But Amina's focus slowly shifted away from them. Her heart wasn't listening to the room, it was listening to something deeper. A quiet voice inside her that she had ignored for years. She pressed the first key, and a soft, trembling note escaped. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't strong, but it carried something real, something honest. A few students giggled under their breath. One teacher sighed impatiently, but Amina didn't stop. She pressed another key, then another. Her fingers were stiff at first, moving carefully like someone learning to walk after a long time. Yet with every second that passed, something inside her warmed, like a frozen river beginning to melt. As she continued, her hands slowly stopped shaking. The music began to settle around her like an old friend returning after many years. The sounds she produced were uncertain but familiar, like memories coming back in fragments. A student whispered, "She's trying too hard," another snickered, expecting her to break down. But the whispers started to fade as Amina's fingers suddenly found a rhythm. A gentle rhythm, but a rhythm full of life. It was as if the piano was reminding her who she used to be. Within moments, Amina felt the old feeling return. The feeling of being connected to the instrument in a way that no one else in the room understood. She let her fingers slide over the keys, and the melody began to grow smoother, richer, and more confident. The same teachers who doubted her slowly leaned forward, their expressions shifting from boredom to curiosity. The students stopped whispering and stared, confused by what they were hearing. The notes she played were no longer shaky. They were flowing like water, soft but steady, gentle but full of meaning. Amina breathed deeply and allowed the music to guide her. She wasn't following the sheet they had placed in front of her. She didn't need it. She knew the piece by heart. Her fingers remembered the patterns, the waves, the emotions. Her mind no longer felt heavy. Her heart no longer felt afraid. The room around her faded, and she entered the world of the music she had once lived in. A world she thought she had lost forever. The teachers exchanged glances. One muttering, "How is she doing that?" Another whispering, "She's better than our top students." The principal blinked several times, unsure if he was imagining the change. The students watched with wide eyes, unsure of what they were witnessing. Was this the same woman they ignored every day? The same cleaner who quietly mopped hallways? They couldn't believe it. The music sounded too beautiful, too controlled, too emotional. It didn't match the image they had of her at all. Amina felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the relief of finally touching the part of herself she had buried. The music lifted her spirit, reminding her of who she once was, and who she still could be. She didn't rush. She didn't show off. She simply played with honesty, letting the music flow from her heart through her fingertips. The hall, once filled with doubts and whispers, became a place of quiet awe. No one dared interrupt her. No one dared speak. They were caught in the spell she unknowingly created as she reached the final notes. Her fingers moved with grace. The melody softened, then faded like a warm breath in winter air. When the last note echoed across the room, not a single person moved. The silence was deep, powerful, almost sacred. No laughter, no whispers, no smirks, only wide eyes staring at the simple cleaner, who had just played like a trained pianist. Amina slowly pulled her hands away from the keys, her heart beating fast. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't expect applause or praise. She only knew one thing. Something inside her had awakened. Something she thought was gone forever. What she didn't realize was that she had just changed the way everyone in that room would see her from that moment on. The people who ignored her were now staring at her with shock, wonder, and confusion. And this was only the beginning of what her music was about to reveal. When the last note faded into the air, the room did not breathe for a long, heavy moment. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even blinked. It was as if the whole hall had frozen in time. The same people who expected Amina to fail were now staring at her like they had witnessed something impossible. The students who giggled earlier now sat wide-eyed, their mouths slightly open. The teachers who doubted her looked stunned, confused, even embarrassed. They couldn't understand how the quiet cleaner, the woman they ignored every day, had just played a piece their best students couldn't manage. A soft gasp came from the back of the room. It was the music teacher who had laughed earlier. He pressed a hand to his chest, whispering to another teacher, "Did you see her fingers? That wasn't luck. That was training." The other teacher nodded slowly, too shocked to speak. A third teacher wiped his glasses, thinking maybe he had imagined the whole performance. But the truth was clear. She didn't just play the difficult piece, she played it beautifully, with emotion and skill the school hadn't seen in years. Amina kept her eyes lowered. She didn't look proud or confident. Instead, she looked almost frightened, as if she had shown too much of herself. She gently folded her hands in her lap, waiting for someone to say something. For a moment, she wondered if they would scold her. Maybe accuse her of faking it. Maybe say she copied the notes accidentally. But the silence continued, heavy and full of disbelief. Amina felt her heart pounding, but she stayed still, hoping the moment would pass quickly. Then a small sound broke the silence. It wasn't laughter this time. It wasn't mockery. It was applause, a single pair of hands clapping slowly. Everyone turned to see a young student standing up, clapping with innocent excitement. A moment later, another student joined, then another, and soon the entire hall filled with applause. Loud, echoing, overwhelming, the sound hit Amina's ears like a wave. She had not heard applause like that in so many years. She never thought she would hear it again. Especially not here, especially not from these people. But the applause didn't come from admiration alone. It came from shock, from awe, from the realization that they had been wrong. They had judged her without knowing her. They had laughed without understanding her worth. And now they couldn't deny what they had just witnessed. Amina blinked back tears, her hands shaking slightly. She didn't smile, not even a little. She was too overwhelmed, too surprised, too unsure of what this sudden change meant for her. The principal cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the room. But even he struggled to hide his shock. His voice cracked as he asked, "Amina, where did you learn to play like that?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She wasn't used to speaking in front of people. She wasn't used to anyone asking about her past. After a moment, she answered quietly, "I used to play. A long time ago." Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, as if she was confessing a secret. One teacher stepped closer, eyes wide. "Used to play?" "That was more than playing. That was mastery," another teacher whispered. "She plays better than our top performers." A few students nodded in agreement. Some of them looked embarrassed, remembering how they had mocked her. Others looked amazed, like they were staring at a legend. Not a cleaner, not someone ordinary, but someone with a rare, hidden gift. Amina felt all the eyes on her and lowered her gaze again. She wished she could disappear. Her heart was full of emotions she didn't know how to handle. Pride, fear, pain, relief, and confusion all mixed together. She hadn't meant to show them her old self. She hadn't planned to reveal the part of her she kept hidden for years. But the music had escaped from her fingers naturally, as if waiting for this moment to be heard again. The principal rubbed his forehead, trying to process what had just happened. He looked at Amina with a new expression. Not annoyance, not impatience, but respect. Deep and sincere. "You have a gift," he said quietly. The teachers nodded, and some students whispered. "She's amazing," Amina shook her head softly. Not believing she deserved such words, she whispered. It was nothing, but no one in the room believed her. They had seen the truth with their own eyes. What none of them knew was that this performance, this moment of raw truth, was only the beginning. Soon, the truth about her past would come out. The truth about her talent, her struggles, and her real story. And the world that once ignored her was about to open its eyes wide. Because the humble woman they overlooked every day was far more extraordinary than anyone imagined. As the applause slowly faded, the principal stepped closer to Amina. His face, which had been strict and impatient an hour ago, was now soft with confusion and respect. He didn't know what to say at first. He simply stared at her as if trying to understand how he had missed something so extraordinary for so long. The teachers also moved closer, forming a small circle around her. Their earlier arrogance had disappeared completely. Replaced by embarrassment and curiosity, they wanted answers. But they didn't know how to ask without sounding foolish. Amina sat still, staring at her hands. They were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of old memories rising again. She felt exposed, as if a part of her heart had been opened in front of the entire room. For years, she had tried to hide her past, to stay unnoticed, to live a small and quiet life. But now the truth was out, at least a small piece of it. And she could no longer pretend she was just a cleaner who knew nothing about music. One of the teachers finally spoke. "Amina, how did you learn to play like that?" His voice was softer than usual, gentle even. Amina hesitated. She didn't want to talk about her past. She didn't want to revisit the painful memories. But something inside her knew that staying silent would only make things more confusing. She took a slow breath and whispered, "I used to train." When I was younger, the teachers exchanged surprised looks, as if they expected a different answer. One of them asked, "Train where? With who?" That wasn't hobby-level skill. That was professional. Amina looked down again. Her voice trembled slightly as she replied, My mother taught me first, then I joined classes I played. In competitions, the room fell silent again, not out of doubt, but out of shock. None of them had expected this. The principal leaned against the wall, trying to understand. Competitions? What kind? Local? National? Amina nodded slightly. Both, she said quietly. I played on stages. A long time ago. Her voice faded at the end. Filled with sadness, the teachers watched her, realizing there was more to her story than talent. There was pain behind her words, pain they had never seen or tried to see. A student stepped forward and asked innocently, "Why did you stop?" It was a simple question, but it hit Amina like a heavy stone. Her eyes lowered further, and she swallowed hard. She didn't want to cry in front of them. She didn't want to show weakness. But the memory of her mother's accident rose in her heart like a deep ache that she could never fully escape. She whispered softly, "My mother passed away." And everything changed. The students looked down ashamed. Realizing they had laughed at someone who carried a heavy past, the teachers also grew quiet. Understanding why she had disappeared from the world of music, the principal sighed, rubbing his forehead as he tried to absorb everything. "Amina, you should have told us," he said gently. She shook her head immediately. "No. I didn't want anyone to know," she whispered. "I didn't want to be noticed or asked to play again." The teachers exchanged sad looks. Suddenly, they understood why she always walked with her head down, why she kept to herself, why she avoided the piano even though she worked around them every day. She wasn't hiding because she was shy. She was hiding because music reminded her of everything she lost. Just then, the door of the hall opened, and the famous music examiner walked in. He had arrived quietly and had heard the ending of her performance from outside the door. He stood tall, dressed in a suit, his eyes focused on Amina with intense curiosity. The teachers hurried to greet him, but he simply raised a hand and said, "Who played that piece?" The room pointed at Amina. The examiner studied her carefully, not looking down on her, but looking at her like she was a rare discovery. "You," he said gently. "Can you play it again?" Amina's heart jumped. She wasn't expecting this. She looked around at the teachers, the students, the principal, all watching her with hopeful eyes this time. Not mocking ones. She felt nervous, overwhelmed, but also something else, something she hadn't felt in years, a spark of belonging. The examiner stepped closer and said, "You have something special. I can hear it." Amina's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know how to respond. Should she refuse? Should she run? Or should she let herself play freely, without fear? Just one more time. She took a slow breath, letting her hand settle gently on the keys again. The hall grew still once more, and for the second time that day, Amina prepared to show a part of herself she thought was gone forever. But this time, she wasn't playing for mockery or fear. She was playing because someone finally saw her, truly saw her, not as a cleaner, but as a pianist, and maybe, just maybe, as someone worthy of music again. Amina sat at the piano again. But this time the feeling in the room was completely different. Earlier, she felt judged, mocked, and pushed into playing against her will. Now the room felt warm, hopeful, almost breathless. The students who once giggled were now leaning forward like they were about to witness something magical. The teachers stood quietly, not daring to whisper this time, and the examiner, a man known for his strict standards, watched her with deep respect. Amina felt everyone's energy around her. But strangely, she didn't feel scared. Instead, she felt a calm she hadn't felt in years, as if the piano itself was welcoming her back. She placed her hands on the keys. Her fingers no longer trembled. They rested gently, confidently, like they belonged there. The examiner nodded slowly, giving her silent permission to begin. She closed her eyes, took a long breath, and then let her fingers move. The first notes rose into the room, smooth and clear, this time. There was no hesitation, no fear holding her back. The melody flowed like water, soft at first, then stronger. Each note carried emotion, grief, hope, love, memories, all mixed together. Her music told a story, her story. Without a single word spoken, the room seemed to fade away. Amina wasn't in a school hall anymore. She was on a stage again, where she once stood proudly as a young girl. The lights were bright, the crowd was silent. Her mother was smiling somewhere in the front row, cheering for her. For the first time in many years, Amina allowed herself to feel that world again. Not with pain but with acceptance. Her fingers danced across the keys, moving with a grace that only true experience and deep emotion could create. The students' eyes widened, the teachers felt shivers. Even the examiner leaned forward, stunned by the raw beauty of her performance. Every rise and fall of the melody seemed to open another piece of her heart. She played not just with skill but with soul. Each sound felt alive, every note felt personal. The examiner whispered under his breath, "Extraordinary." A teacher covered her mouth in awe. Another wiped away a tear before anyone could see. The students watched silently, as if they knew this was not just a performance, but a moment in someone's life they would never forget. When Amina reached the middle of the piece, the music grew stronger, powerful. Filled with emotion she had held back for years, she let out the grief she had buried, the loneliness she lived with, the dreams she thought she lost, the love she still carried for her mother. The music wrapped the room like a soft blanket, touching everyone who listened. Some students blinked rapidly, trying not to cry. The teachers felt humbled. Realizing how wrong they had been, the principal slowly sat down, overwhelmed by the talent he had overlooked all this time. And then slowly, the music softened again. The final notes floated gently through the hall like falling feathers. Delicate and peaceful, Amina lifted her fingers from the keys with a trembling breath. The last note lingered in the air for a moment longer, and then silence filled the room. But it was not the silence of doubt this time. It was the silence of deep respect, amazement, and admiration. Amina opened her eyes slowly, unsure of what she would see. Her heart raced, wondering if she had done the right thing by letting the music out again. The examiner was the first to speak. His voice was soft but firm. "That was brilliant," he said. "Not good. Not excellent. Brilliant." The teachers nodded quickly. Almost too quickly. They were still stunned. Their eyes shone with something new. Not pity, not surprise, but genuine admiration. A student clapped first, then another, and within seconds, the whole hall erupted in applause, loud and emotional. The sound washed over Amina like warm rain. She had not heard applause like that since she was a teenager. She felt her eyes fill with tears, but she wiped them away gently. The examiner stepped closer. "Amina," he said, "you are a virtuoso. Your talent is rare, beautiful, and powerful." She shook her head shyly. But he continued, "You should not be cleaning floors. You should be performing, teaching, inspiring." The teachers murmured in agreement. The principal nodded slowly, realizing how wrong he had been about her. The students looked at her like she was a star, a real musician, someone special. Amina felt overwhelmed. But for the first time in many years, she also felt seen, truly seen. The examiner looked at her with a thoughtful smile. "I would like to help you return to music," he said softly. "If you are willing." Amina's heart pounded. She didn't know what to say. Her old world, the world she thought she had lost forever, was standing right in front of her again, waiting for her to choose. And in that moment, everything felt possible again. Her past, her pain, her talent, her story, all coming together to offer her a new beginning. A beginning she never expected, but maybe always deserved. Amina sat quietly at the piano. Her hands resting gently on her lap, the applause had finally faded. But the warmth of it still stayed around her like a soft blanket. For the first time in many years, she felt something she thought she had lost forever. Belonging. She wasn't the invisible cleaner anymore. She wasn't the woman everyone walked past without noticing. She wasn't the broken girl who ran away from her dreams. She was someone different now, someone she almost forgot she could be. The examiner stood in front of her, still amazed by what he had witnessed. His eyes were filled with respect. "You have a gift," he said softly. "A gift the world needs to hear again." The teachers nodded in agreement. Their expressions were full of regret and admiration. They knew they had been blind. They knew they had judged her unfairly. They knew they had missed the greatness standing right in front of them every single day. The principal cleared his throat and stepped forward, his voice softer than ever. "Amina, if you want, we would be honored if you stayed with us as more than a cleaner." Amina's breath caught in her chest. She did not expect such words. She looked around at all the faces watching her, students, teachers, the examiner, all waiting for her answer. She had lived in silence for so long, avoiding attention, avoiding questions, avoiding her past, but now she stood at a crossroads. One path led back to the quiet, lonely life she knew. The safe life, the small life. The other path led back to music. Back to stages, back to her true self. It was frightening, but also beautiful. A door she thought was locked forever. The examiner stepped closer and said, "I can arrange for you to perform again. In front of real audiences. If you are ready." That word, ready, echoed in her mind. Was she ready to return to the world that once broke her heart? Was she ready to face the memories of her mother? Was she ready to step into the light after hiding in shadows for so long? She looked at the piano, her oldest friend, her only witness to both her joy and her pain. The instrument seemed to whisper back, telling her that it was time to come home. Slowly, Amina looked up. Her eyes were bright with emotion. But her voice was steady. "Yes," she whispered. "I want to try again." The examiner smiled with relief. The teachers let out soft breaths. The students clapped happily. And the principal nodded proudly, for the first time. The school saw her not as Amina the cleaner, but Amina the musician, the artist, the virtuoso they almost lost to silence. From that day forward, everything changed. Amina no longer carried a cleaning bucket in her hands. Instead, she carried sheet music. She no longer wiped the dust off the pianos. She taught students how to make them sing. She no longer avoided eye contact. She stood confidently at the front of class. Her voice gentle but full of quiet authority. Students loved her immediately. They listened to her stories, her lessons, her music. Some even asked for private lessons. They wanted to learn from the woman who played like she held magic in her fingers. News of her performance spread quickly. Videos of her playing leaked online. People shared them with comments like "hidden genius" and "undiscovered talent." Parents from other schools requested her as a teacher. Musicians wanted to meet her, and soon an invitation arrived, a request for her to perform at a special concert. Amina held the letter in her hands with trembling excitement. She knew what it meant. It meant she was returning to the stage. Not as a child prodigy this time, but as a woman who survived loss, silence, and pain, and still found her music again on the night of the concert. She stepped onto the stage wearing a simple dress. The hall was filled with people, lights and soft murmurs. Her heart raced, but she wasn't afraid. Somewhere inside her, she felt her mother's presence. Warm and comforting, she sat at the grand piano, closed her eyes, and began to play. The music rose beautifully, filling every corner of the hall. People listened in silence, mesmerized, when she finished. The audience stood and clapped loudly. Amina smiled with tears in her eyes. This time, the applause didn't hurt, it healed. When she returned to the music school the next day, the children ran to her excitedly. Calling her Ma'am Amina with pride, she felt her heart lift, knowing she had found her place again. Not as someone hiding from her past, but as someone who embraced it. She understood now that her gift wasn't meant to be buried, it was meant to be shared. And every time she played, every time she taught, every time she touched a piano key, she felt her mother smiling somewhere in her heart. Amina had finally stepped back into the life she was meant to live. Not because someone forced her, but because she remembered who she truly was. And the whole world was ready to listen to her again.